as I continue to learn more about neurodiversity affirming practices and integrate them into my own work as an EISLP, I've been re-examining my role as a feeding therapist supporting autistic clients.
Mm.
And it's not my job really to get a child to eat, but rather provide supports and strategies that can recognize and build on their internal motivation, honoring their autonomy and building competence. However, I feel like I've more recently recognized that my reflection has been limited as I've only considered the neurodivergent child and not necessarily the neurodivergent caregiver with whom I'm expecting the child to work with and eat with. And I feel like as therapists, we go to seminars and webinars and conferences and we learn all these new strategies that we want to just dump on the families without necessarily considering the capacity or the sensory preferences or differences or executive functioning differences of the caregivers. So I'm wondering, posing this to both of you, how can we consider the parents' sensory experiences and differences in executive functioning during the mealtime and feeding routine, as well as others, can relate to thresholds related to smells or chewing sounds? And what are some of those specific questions that we can ask caregivers that show we're being mindful and open to their own sensory experiences and regulation and priorities?
I appreciate your question. As an OT, it's something that I worked in feeding in the field, both in a sensory clinic and EI. It's a paradigm shift that we need because there are people like me who are neurodivergent, and neurodivergent experience people are the experts of being neurodivergent, because what you know is that eating, the occupation of creating food, the emotional experiences, the connection that we have through food, the sensory, the neurologically based sensory profile of the eater, the person who is consuming the food, is critical. And when and the neurology also says, when you introduce trauma and you force somebody to make a choice, frontal temporal lobe, to choose trauma, it has devastating effects. This directly correlates to eating.
If you're engaging in feeding support for a young person and for a family, I think first and foremost, I would want to know that that's on the child's priority, that that's something that they want to do. Any intervention I have with any child is always, is this what you want to do? And even those children that are non-speakers, looking for their ability to give consent, we're trying to give as much opportunity for them to give consent. Do they have AAC? Do they have other ways of communicating that they're happy to do that? And if they're not, I would not want to be engaging in anything that would cause trauma, like you said. And I wouldn't be saying specifically things like closed options. Do you want this one or this one? Because they might not want either of them. And we don't want to be teaching masking around that, because that can cause increased stress and anxiety and lead to mental health difficulties. We know that there's a lot of literature around masking. So it's so good that you're asking this question, because this is then how this conversation's come out of that. And I think your question was related to how you can support the parents if you're engaging in feeding and if you're engaging in supporting a young person to expand their foods. If we have neurodivergent children, the likelihood is that there's an increased link of neurodivergent adults. And I think we have to be respecting the adult's previous experience for feeding. So I don't know for you, Sarah, but my father was like, you can't get down from the table until you've eaten everything on your plate, and elbows off the table, sit up straight. And there'd be a lot of arguments at the table, and I'd feel really stressed. So for me, social eating is not something I enjoy. I find it really stressful. So if I was to work with my son and do feeding therapy, I'd find that quite stressful. But I think what I would find really helpful is if a therapist or a family support worker or a coach said to me, how was your experience of growing up and eating? Like, how was that for you? What were the barriers? What were the strengths? What were the things that you felt really helped you with engaging in expanding your food choices? What were the things that made you feel relaxed and calm? I mean, for some children, they can get extremely overwhelmed by the sound of eating. If I was engaging in feeding therapy with my son and I hadn't been asked those questions, you wouldn't know. So I think it would be about, I think what would be helpful for you to know here is, what kind of family routines and rules do you have as a family around eating? Do you all eat together? Is there an opportunity to watch TV or to not be focused on the food? Do you run around when you're eating? Is there an expectation to sit? What causes conflict with the family? So it might be little Johnny's constantly running around. He won't sit down, and it's so frustrating to me because I've spent all day making his dinner that I know he loves, and he doesn't sit down and enjoy it. So it might be, what's your perspective about him enjoying the food? Is it actually that he's not sitting down, he's not enjoying it? Is that actually the reality? He might be really enjoying it, but he just needs to move as well. That's okay. So it's about looking at what supports and what causes barriers around eating, and just ensuring that we've got consent from the child. I think that's so important, and that it's not masked consent. And I think that can be quite challenging if you've got a child who really wants to do the right thing, especially little girls who are autistic. They really want to do the right thing. They really want to please the adults around them. How can we make sure that it's not masked consent? We have to really make sure that it's something that they're happy to do. And with regards to regulation, I think before, like you were saying, Sarah, I mean, in order for us to eat, our parasympathetic nervous system needs to be active. And for those of you that aren't aware, that helps us rest and digest. So we have to be calm to eat. So if we're sitting down and someone's scraping the plates with their knife and fork, or someone's chewing really loudly, or there's a radio on in the background that never turns off, and our arousal levels just going up and up and up, we need to look at the environmental factors first and foremost. What environments are our young people in? How are they eating? How are they supported? What's their seating like? Before we start talking about actually eating the food, because children have to be in a well-regulated state. So do parents. And I know there's probably parents here who have got such high anxiety about eating. I work with so many families, and getting their child to eat causes so much anxiety for the family, because as a parent, you want to be able to provide nutrition and nourishment, don't you, for your child? And if your child is a picky eater, if you want to term it that, or has difficulties eating a wide variety of foods, that can cause a lot of stress for the family. So really, if you've got a stressed family member and a child that's just really struggling to eat, then that's just going to cause even more stress. I think highlighting that's helpful, but we have to be so careful we're not placing blame, because as you said, Sarah, before, and you said a few times, parents really want to do the right thing. And I believe that. I really believe that parents want to do the right thing. They need compassion, they need education so that they know what the right thing might look like for their individual child.
I think both of your comments have been extremely helpful and very great reminders for all of us working in feeding therapy, and not working in more of that behavior-based forced compliance, but making sure that everyone's on board and everyone's consenting to the work that we're doing.
I don't know if you have goals that you have to achieve, or if you have targets that you need to achieve with the family when you're engaging in feeding. And if that's the case, I'd really encourage you to look at what kind of goals you're setting. So is it Johnny can have 4 pieces of new food by the end of this month? Or is it that Johnny can sit at the table and eat a whole meal? Is that actually the right kind of goal for that particular child? Or would it be, this child is well regulated to sit at the table for up to 3 minutes, and they're really, they're feeling calm, they're feeling relaxed, that's more important to me as a therapist who understands about sensory regulation than putting food in the mouth. Because I think there's so many different steps that we need to take before we get to eating the food. Eating the food's kind of like in the distance, over the hill, away in another country. There's so many other things that we need to do first. And I think we need to be careful that we don't feel pressure from our organizations to push children forward when they're just not ready. Because I think as therapists and coaches, we have to be saying, actually, no, they're not ready. We have to empower ourselves to push back a bit. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree and appreciate those comments. And I hope we all get the opportunity to kind of explore that further, because it conflicts with a lot we've learned in graduate school and some other programming. So I appreciate those highlights very much.